So here's an age-old question. Can we separate artists from their art? The short answer is not really. I mean, we try, but what we do instead is just cancel you completely, or we find a way to justify your actions enough that we can deal with it. If you follow me for any length of time, you know I done covered people who've done horrible things, and I can usually separate the person from the bad action. But the hardest two for me to separate are sexual assault or rape, or a guy who physically abuses women in a non-sexual way. Now understand, these are my personal feelings. You don't have to feel this way. But for whatever reason, my brain processes these two things as deep character flaws that inherently make you a bad person. See, I don't think a guy with an addiction is necessarily a bad guy just because of an addiction. But a guy who imposes physical dominance on a female, that's just something I really struggle to forgive, even from afar. This was me 2 years ago. In this video, I'm unboxing an autographed replica helmet of one of my favorite players. But of course, I, along with all of y'all that may have watched this video, had no idea about the pandemonium that lied ahead. So I posted that video in November of 2020, and only 3 months later, that version of Deshaun Watson that I thought I knew would vanish into thin air, never to be heard from again. On March 16, 2021, lawyer Tony Buzbee filed the first lawsuit against the star quarterback. He was being accused of sexual assault. So when the information initially dropped, I wasn't sure if Deshaun was guilty or if he had been set up. And given the fact that he never had any reported issues in the past, player I followed pretty closely, of course I gave him the benefit of the doubt, as I wasn't ready to just call a man guilty of a crime just because he was accused. There's 2 videos I've done in the past that have never been more relevant than right now. That's what happened to Darren Sharper and what happened to Sean Oakman. So Darren Sharper was initially thought to be innocent. Dude turned out to be a scumbag and a serial rapist. Sean Oakman was initially thought to be guilty. Turns out he was lied on and had his whole career ruined because of it. These are 2 clear examples of each side of this coin. Irrefutable proof that despite being rich, famous, successful, some guys will still become sexual predators, but also providing proof that some guys get lied on and set up. But which one was this? I still wasn't sure. There was reason to believe that it may have been a setup. Deshaun had publicly demanded a trade only a few weeks before the first allegation popped up. Could the Texans be trying to sabotage dude's career out of spite? The counter argument was pretty damn strong though. It basically went something like this. Why would the Texans intentionally damage Deshaun's reputation, completely tanking his trade value in the process, knowing that they was gonna have to trade him? It was a good question. Them doing that wouldn't make any sense. But it also didn't make sense when they traded DeAndre Hopkins, who was probably a top 3 receiver in the league at the time. They traded dude for a 2nd-round pick and a 30-year-old running back, all because of a personal issue between him and then coach and GM Bill O'Brien. So if they did something that was counterproductive and based on spite in the recent past, how could I just assume that they would not do the exact same thing in this situation? But still, I wasn't sure. I needed more information before developing a concrete opinion that I was comfortable sharing online. March 17th. 1 day after the original lawsuit was filed, 2 additional sexual assault lawsuits were filed against Deshaun as well. Then the next day, 4 new cases. It was so extreme and so fast and so out of nowhere, it almost felt like a hoax. And almost all of the cases was being represented by the same lawyer, Tony Buzbee. Now Tony's past gave some initial credence to the thought that maybe Deshaun had been set up. Turns out dude had once claimed to be neighbors with Texans owner. This suggested that maybe there was a relationship there of some kind. Did the owner put him up to this? So when it comes to asking questions, there's only 2 types of people in this world. People who type their question into a caption and press send, and people who type their question into Google and press search. Guess which one I am? I looked into Tony Buzbee and found that he'd once taken out a billboard to petition the Texans to draft Johnny Manziel. There it was again, these small little subtle connections to the Texans. Maybe there was something there, but then I thought to myself, if he actually had a relationship with the Texans owner, his neighbor, why would he take a damn billboard out instead of just going to his house and ringing the damn doorbell or picking up the phone or whatever, just contacting his guy, right? A little more searching and I found where Buzbee admitted to overstating the whole neighbors thing. And I thought to myself, okay, this dude's kind of full of it for presenting it that way in the first place, but my whole conspiracy theory that I was trying to put together is just not really holding up. Okay, cool. Put that to the side. Over time, information continued to come out and things kind of started to crystallize a little bit. And by the time I reached the detailed accounts from the alleged victims about what happened, and then saw Deshaun's response to those things, that's when my very non-concrete opinion started to move in the other direction. I no longer believed Deshaun was innocent and being set up. At this point, I was pretty damn sure dude was guilty of something. The only thing in question for me at that point was the actual severity of his actions. I believed then that he should and would get some type of punishment. And when the courts chose not to indict, I said, okay, so it's not criminal, but he's still gonna get suspended. The only question was, for how long? Alright, real quick before we jump in, a quick word from today's video sponsor, Raycon. So Raycon everyday earbuds look, feel, and sound better than ever before. And they price just right, so you can get quality audio at half the price of other premium brands. For me, one of my favorite features is the ability to switch from awareness mode to noise isolation. Like at this point, for me, this is a must-have feature. Sometimes I want to zone out completely with noise isolation, but sometimes I might be out in public and need to be aware of my surroundings, but I still want to keep the little vibe going that I started in the car. So that's where awareness mode comes in. And switching back and forth is super easy. You just hold down the button on the right earbud, like so, and boom, it'll switch back and forth from awareness mode to noise isolation. I'm actually using it right now. I got my little chill background music going that I like to use when I'm in here working. Now, true to the name, everyday earbuds, these are great for everyday use. If you one of them cats that get up early, or maybe you work nights, and when you trying to get your day started, the wife and kids might still be asleep. Even if you forget to charge them, you can count on these to hold you down in the mornings. The 32 hours of battery life comes in clutch. Now, all of that, and again, these go for less than half the price of the leading competitors. So if you want to grab you a pair, click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/FlemLo to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. Y'all know what time it is. Let's jump back in. The date was July 31st, 2022. It had now been nearly a full 2 years since I unboxed my autographed Deshaun Watson helmet. It was one of the last Sundays for a long time with no NFL football, and rumors had been swirling for months regarding now Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson. The latest rumor was that Judge Sue Robinson, the judge appointed to make the initial Deshaun Watson ruling, was finally close to dropping her decision. But it had been dragging on for so damn long that nobody really believed it was coming. Spoiler alert, they was kinda right, but more on that later. Monday, August 1st, bright and early around 7:30 a.m., NFL fans woke up to pandemonium. The Deshaun Watson verdict had finally dropped, and after rumors of the NFL at one point seeking an indefinite suspension of at least 1 year, Deshaun's suspension actually came in at only 6 games. Now, I could clip this next statement and post it every single day, and it would be true. What is this evergreen statement that I'm talking about? Here it is. People were outraged. This is literally every day, bro. Only this time, maybe they had a point. How's a cat with 20 plus allegations of sexual misconduct given a lighter sentence than a guy who bet $1,500 on his own team to win a game that he wasn't even playing in? And just like the American judicial system, these punishments oftentimes seem unbalanced and go against common sense. And if the courts can't even get it right, I find it extremely weird that people expect the NFL to get it perfect. And I'm not like taking up for the NFL. It's just one of those things, and I've said this before, people hold like sports organizations and athletes to a higher standard than they hold judges and politicians and presidents. It's the craziest thing. And I think it's because in this country, we secretly worship entertainment, whether we're willing to admit that or not. But anyway, I digress. So the suspension dropped and people of course flipped out. The reaction was strong and immediate, but people had ignored one key piece of information while speed reacting to the news. The NFL held the right to appeal. The fact that the NFL held the right to appeal meant that this was clearly not over. It wasn't over. And that little plea from the NFLPA begging the NFL not to use its negotiated right and threatening to sue pretty much guaranteed that the NFL would absolutely use that right. Why you think they negotiated that deal in the first place? Just to have it and not use it? And then the sentence was so far from what the NFL was seeking. They wanted an indefinite suspension of at least a year. He got 6 games. You thought they were going to sit on that? Come on, bro. So the next day, the NFL predictably announces that they are appealing. And now Twitter is outraged again. But this time it's due to the appeal. And if y'all can ever be into this stuff and pay attention to everything that happens, but separate yourself from it a little bit just to get perspective, trust me, you'll honestly have the best seat in the house and you can see things that other people that's so close to it like this that they can't see because you sitting back here, you know? And basically the thing I noticed with this is it did not matter what happened. There was gonna be crazy backlash and crazy outrage regardless. So because that part of it is a constant, if I'm the NFL, why would I even take that into consideration? It's like, bro, they're gonna be pissed no matter what. So why not just do what the hell we wanted to do in the first place? So the appeal goes in. Internet analysts, TV sports analysts, people push back. Tons of people were asking the exact same question. And it was a fair question too. If Roger Goodell is gonna make the decision anyway, what the hell was the point of going through this long ass process? Fair question. Great question. So remember when I said there's 2 types of people who ask questions? Yeah, I Googled it and eventually came to a 3rd grade understanding of how this whole process actually works. Not how it's written, not how it's stated, not whether or not it's a good process. That was all irrelevant at this point. I just needed to know in the real world, practically, how does this process play out? Why is it in place? And was it a complete waste of time like it definitely seemed to be? For a long time in the NFL, the evil Roger Goodell did indeed act as judge, jury, and executioner. I use this phrase because every single TV segment I saw used it. Judge, jury, executioner. Roger Goodell, judge, jury, executioner. And there's actually a ton of truth to that. So before this most recent process was put in place, the NFL would do their own investigation, decide whether or not you was guilty, and decide how long you was getting suspended. And if you appeal to them. Judge, jury, executioner. Roger Goodell, all him. But now that they've hired Judge Sue Robinson, she actually serves as one of those very key roles in this process. This is an excerpt from a Pro Football Talk article. While the commissioner has the power to overturn, reduce, modify, or increase the discipline previously issued, the commissioner cannot alter a decision to not discipline the player at all. The league office has indeed confirmed that if the disciplinary officer, Sue Robinson in this case, finds that there should be no discipline at all, or if she finds that the NFL didn't present enough evidence to prove Deshaun was guilty, in that situation, the case is over. Based on my admittedly limited understanding, she effectively acts as the jury. So the NFL has to present their case to Judge Sue Robinson, and then she and she alone decides whether or not the person being accused is actually guilty of what they're being accused of. So the same way the jury will go in the back and deliberate, and then they'll come out with their verdict. That's essentially Sue Robinson's purpose within this entire thing. And her decision on innocence or guilt cannot be overturned by the NFL or the NFLPA. She has final say on innocence or guilt. That's her thing. In her statement, she says that the NFL proved that Deshaun Watson was indeed guilty of violating the personal conduct policy. That right there is set in stone. Well, what about the 6 games? What about it? The way this process is set up, it doesn't actually matter, because once she says they're guilty, regardless to the number of games she recommends, the NFL has the right to appeal to itself and then set that number of games at effectively whatever they want. Now, the NFLPA feels the NFL is being unfair. They can take them to court, and that's actually the point that Judge Sue Robinson's recommendation of 6 games actually comes into effect. So you probably heard some people saying that if Deshaun sues, he could end up on the field in week 1. That's actually not the case. If he does sue when they file the restraining order or do whatever paperwork they got to do, at that point, the earliest he would be able to take the field would be week 7, because until it's actually overturned by the NFL, that 6 games is what's set in stone. So even if they tied this thing up in court litigation and filed the restraining order, all of that, the earliest he could still get back on the field would be week 7. So that's why some people are so upset, because while he can't decide whether or not Deshaun is guilty, once it is decided that Deshaun is guilty by this judge, Goodell can come right back in with the big joker and just give him whatever punishment he wants, assuming it's within reason based on the judge's findings. So while Roger Goodell is no longer judge, jury, and executioner, he still is judge and executioner. You know what I'm saying? That just is what it is. That's the truth. But the whole thing about the NFLPA trying to sue is just like, bro, did y'all not agree to this process? You know what I'm saying? I just don't understand how they think they're going to win in court. Like, now that'll shock me. If they do sue and then win, I'll be surprised. Only because from the NFLPA's standpoint, this is a terrible deal, but you agreed to it. You know what I'm saying? It's like signing a 360 deal. You signed it. You know what I'm saying? Now you gotta honor that contract, bro, until they either let you out of the deal or you negotiate something else. Like, it is what it is. They gave you that Honda Civic for your signing bonus. You drove it. Now you're stuck. All right, so if you've already just chosen a side and you dug in, it don't really matter, like what I said in this video. But if you're on the fence, if you're unsure or just curious, here are a few things that the judge said in her statement in regards to Deshaun Watson's guilt. She pointed out the fact that Deshaun insisted on using a small Gatorade towel instead of the normal sheet that massage therapists provide, all while insisting that the therapist massage in places that commonly produce erections. She deduced that he had a sexual purpose when he booked these appointments, not a therapeutic one, further proven by the fact that he never sought out the most experienced therapist, suggesting some other selection method. She also said that the NFL was able to prove that Deshaun knew sexual contact was unwanted, and also she pointed out the fact that all four of these therapists declined Deshaun's invitation to a second session. And that little line right there is probably a big part of the reason why the NFL only presented these 4 cases. She called this behavior predatory. She said it was the most egregious of its kind. She said that the NFL did provide enough evidence for her to conclude that dude was guilty of violating the personal conduct policy. Then she recommended the 6 games, based off what she said was the NFL's precedent that they had set before. She said despite the number of cases, Deshaun's actions still fell into the non-violent sexual assault category. So for example, Deshaun was accused of sexual misconduct. Somebody like a Big Ben was actually accused of full-on rape. That will fall under violent sexual assault. They're both obviously terrible, but she was making the point that they're not exactly the same thing, and she didn't like the fact that the NFL was trying to treat them as if they were the same thing. She said that players who've fallen into the non-violent category had only been suspended by the NFL a maximum of 3 games in the past. But she did admit that this case was much more egregious than those others, and so she bumped it up to 6 games. She doubled it. But it is still kind of wild for Deshaun to have 20 plus allegations and only get a 3-game bump. But if she found dude guilty in all 4 cases that were presented to her, you'd think she would instead quadruple the punishment as opposed to doubling it, since most of these old cases she is talking about only had 1 victim. Had she done that, she would have came out with a number of 12 games, which I think a lot more people would have accepted. And even though they wanted a full season, that actually may have been a ruling that the NFL would have rolled with. So why say all of that stuff she said, then only go with 6 games? Trying to put myself in her shoes, here's what could have been her thought process. She didn't want to come in and set new precedents as to like what a punishment of this magnitude should be. But it seemed like she very clearly and maybe deliberately passed the ball back to the NFL, because of course she knows what this process is. She knows when they appeal that it goes back to them, and then they would have the opportunity to set a new precedent for their own damn league. And then if she had to look at another case like this in the future, this example would be added to it, making it a lot more black and white for her to be able to dish out suspension recommendations without it having to go through this whole appeals process. So when you really just kind of break down the statement, it was basically just an alley-oop for Roger Goodell to come in and throw it down, and the crowd goes wild. Except he didn't throw it down. He instead channeled his inner NBA streak, and after hanging in mid-air for a minute, he tossed the ball back up for a double alley to the former New Jersey Attorney General Peter C. Harvey, somebody said to be one of the country's experts when it comes to sexual assault cases. Will he come in and give a fair sentence, or will he just come in and do Roger Goodell's bidding? Or the third question is what the NFL and Roger Goodell were actually seeking, which the indefinite suspension with a minimum of 1 year, Is that the fair sentence? You know what I'm saying? Of course, if he makes that ruling, we'll never be able to distinguish because Roger Goodell had the ability to either make the decision himself or handpick somebody to make it. He picks his man. So if his boy come back and give Deshaun Watson the exact same suspension that Roger Goodell was pushing for in the beginning, we all know how that's gonna look, and we know that Twitter is gonna explode. But again, we also know that Twitter's gonna explode no matter what happens. So if this new judge gives the full year, we're gonna get two types of reports / reactions. One group is gonna say Goodell fought dirty to get his way and please his ego. Another is going to say the NFL ultimately did what's best for the league. It's interesting too because what nobody is going to say is that maybe, just maybe in this case, Goodell's ego and what's best for the league might actually be aligned. Believe it or not, that does happen. It's like when you watch your favorite villain team up with the hero for a short period of time. He really doing it for his own evil purposes, but in this case, his evil purposes just happen to lead to an outcome that is for the greater good. Look, no matter what happens, it's going to be a shitstorm either way. But I think suspending Deshaun for a full year is probably what's best for the league as a whole. I think like the women's groups and the people that's going to come for the NFL will be somewhat happy with that punishment. I mean, a year, that's a pretty extreme punishment. This is a pretty extreme situation and it deserves a pretty extreme punishment. I'm not saying it don't. But I feel like the punishment matches what they was able to prove that he did. You know what I'm saying? Also, Browns fans might complain a little bit, but honestly, bro, I think a lot of Browns fans, they're just gonna be glad to get back to football. I think ultimately a lot of them gonna be happy that, look, they know they rocking with Brissett this year and they know Deshaun coming back next year. Okay, cool, we got a plan in place. Now we can actually move forward. Because a lot of Browns fans, they just like football, bro. They love the Browns. So they're gonna rock with whoever on the field. And another reason I say the full year is probably what's best, like overall, is because if they suspend dude for less than a year, bro, I don't care if he come back in week 17. It's gonna be large groups of people who act like he ain't get suspended at all. And y'all know I ain't lying, bro. Just do the year. Get it over with. You ain't losing no money due to the contract structure. And if Deshaun sue and the suspension get pushed back until next year, that's when it's gonna start eating into your pockets if you're missing games next year, because that's when a real contract kick in. So on top of the 20 some odd allegations, Deshaun was asked directly if he had hired 66 different female therapists within a 17-month span, and my man couldn't even deny that. 66 in a year and a half means you absolutely have an issue. And he's constantly saying he didn't do anything wrong, and I can't prove that he lying, but I just don't believe him. You know, in my opinion, something that probably started as a somewhat innocent fetish has now grown into full-on predatory behavior, and to be honest, it's probably good that they caught him now, while people can still debate whether he should get 6 games or a full season. Because if you look at the patterns in dude behavior, he had really no regard for how he was moving. Honestly, if unchecked, this thing could have easily grown into something way more sinister. I remember covering Kellen Winslow Jr. and his story kind of started out with little sexual misconduct type things, goes unchecked, and eventually evolves into serial rape. Yeah, he's in prison now. The last thing I'll say on it is this. I'm really glad they mandated therapy for dude. I hope he approaches the therapy seriously, and I hope he doesn't approach it the way he approached his physical therapy, because whatever was going on with dude mentally is extremely dangerous, not just to him, but of course to others, because I really would hate to see that behavior escalate and then grow into something that he'd never be able to come back from. Peace.